If you guys played GTA 4, you already know that Liberty City is full of messed up people, like gangsters, corrupt cops, arms dealers, killers. And yeah, that's just a frickin' normal Tuesday in that game. But there is one character in GTA 4 that is on a completely different level from all of them. And the most insane thing about him is that he's just a random encounter that most people completely miss. And the ones who do find him, they remember him for the rest of their life. I'm talking about Eddie Lowe, and I know some of you already know his name, and if you do, you already know why we're here. But I promise you, even if you think you know everything about Eddie Lowe, you don't. Because when you actually dig into this character, what he did, what his house looked like, what his childhood was, what real serial killers Rockstar built him from, and what happens inside the game world while he's walking around that nobody talks about, you start realizing something. Rockstar didn't just make a creepy character. They made something that feels genuinely deeply wrong in a way that almost no video game has ever done. And yeah, that's the normal thing for Rockstar. They hid him in an alleyway at 2 a.m. and let most players walk right past him. So let's talk about how you find Eddie Lowe first, because this is the first thing Rockstar does to you before he says a single word. Eddie only appears at night, between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. only. And when you go to his location during the day, you see nothing there, just an empty alley in Alderney City. And when you show up at the right time, it's always foggy. Always. It seems like Rockstar locked in specific weather just for his encounters. And right across from where he stands every single night is a car dealership called Auto Eroticar, a sexual predator standing every night directly across from a dealership called Auto Eroticar. That is either the darkest Rockstar joke ever made or the most deliberate detail they ever placed in any game. Either way, I cannot get it out of my head. And when I first found this character, I was just roaming around Alderney at night doing nothing, and I picked him up thinking he was just a random mission. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. Now let's talk about what actually happens when you meet him, because this is where everything starts. He looks normal. Completely normal. But trust me, when he opens his big mouth, within 30 seconds you want to close the game and go outside. He says disturbing things immediately, before you even agree to help him.
I suppose we all do. In the end.
Okay.
Wait, mister. Do you ever wonder if animals, they masturbate?
Okay, listen, friend, you're really creeping me out.
No, it's a silly question. I know, silly question. It's just I was wondering because maybe that's what makes us different from the animals. I mean, masturbating, because it turns out we don't have souls, and animals use tools and all that kind of thing. So maybe it's the masturbating. Maybe that's God's real gift to us.
Okay, I'd really like to get back to planet Earth.
Nico tries to leave, and Eddie apologizes. He says sorry for being awkward. Please don't go, I just need a ride. And here's the thing. That apology is what gets you, because he sounds almost sad, almost lonely, and Nico, against his better judgment, stays. Eddie asks for a ride to the docks. He needs to drop off some friends, some kids, and he makes a joke about heading off just casually, like it's nothing. And you drive him there, and he gets out, and he throws a gym bag into the water, and he comes back, and you take him to Westminster because he says he's heard enough screams from the people of Alderney and wants to hear screams from Algonquin people now. And that line goes past most players too fast. He said screams. He said he's heard enough of one city's screams and wants to try another city's screams. And Nico just keeps driving. Now here is the part that breaks people when they realize it later. Right after this encounter, the radio and the Liberty Tree newspaper report that a decapitated head was found at the docks inside a sports bag. No body, just a head, in a bag, thrown into the water.
Meanwhile, a corpse has been found by the river in North Algonquin, and like a couple of other recent murder victims, the corpse has been beheaded and desecrated, prompting some cops to think the unthinkable. We may have a serial killer on the loose in Liberty City for the first time in years. Although detectives appealed for calm and said nothing is clear yet, they are requesting joggers and late-night walkers to be especially careful. We will stay with the story and try to get people really hysterical. This is Weasel News. This is...
You were the getaway driver. You didn't know. Nico didn't know. You picked up a serial killer, drove him to dump a decapitated head, drove him to his next hunting ground, and got paid $500 for it. And Eddie got that money by pickpocketing people. He cuts pockets open with a blade and takes the wallets. That is how he pays for things. That is the person you helped. Okay, so now let's talk about who Eddie Lowe actually is, because this is where it gets truly disturbing. Eddie was born in San Francisco in 1977, and his father was abusing him from when he was a child, sexually, and also forcing him to wear girls' clothes and grow his hair out and sending him to school dressed that way. Eddie killed his father eventually, out of spite. Just killed him. But his mother is the most disturbing part of Eddie's whole story. She was strict, controlling, did not let him watch TV except cartoons and wildlife programs, punished him constantly, and Eddie loved her anyway, way too much. He says in the game that he wanted to marry his mother. That is the exact phrase he uses. And one day, when he was still a child, he was playing with her in the backyard, in the sandbox, and he pushed her head into the sand, and he held it there, and she stopped moving. And he says it was an accident. He just wanted to play. After she died, Eddie kept all of her clothes, including her underwear. He wears them, and he kept her severed breasts in a shoebox under his bed. Now, I need to stop here, because if you know real-life true crime, you know exactly what Rockstar just described, because this is almost word for word the real story of Ed Gein, the actual American serial killer from Wisconsin in the 1950s, who kept female body parts all over his house, wore human skin, dug up graves to build furniture from bones, and was completely obsessed with his dead mother. Ed Gein is the real person that Norman Bates from Psycho is based on, that Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs is based on, that Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on, and Rockstar took him as a direct blueprint for Eddie Lowe. Shoebox of breasts, keeping the mother's clothes, it's the same person. They just put him in a GTA game and gave him an alleyway in Alderney. And then there's another one, Henry Lee Lucas, another real American serial killer whose mother also forced him to wear women's clothes, sent him to school in a dress. He killed her too. And then a third one, Albert Fish, a cannibalistic child serial killer who was notorious for the number of sexual crimes he committed. Rockstar took multiple of the most disturbing real human beings in American criminal history and mixed them all together into one character. Eddie Lowe is not just one serial killer, he is all of them at the same time. Now let me tell you what Eddie's childhood actually looked like, because Rockstar went into detail that most games would never touch. At age 9, he was arrested for torturing an animal. At age 14, arrested for indecent exposure. In elementary school, he would dig a hole in the ground and just sit in it. And one of his first kills was a red-headed kid who urinated in his hole. He killed a child for that. He had a little brother, too, who he killed and hid the body in a pond. He went to multiple mental institutions throughout childhood. By high school, he was already torturing and killing classmates regularly. At age 18, arrested again for public masturbation in a park. The LCPD database has an entry on Eddie. His official criminal charges listed are public lewdness, indecent exposure, and animal cruelty. That is all they have on him officially. That is all they know, while he's out in the CID every night, doing things that the game only describes and never shows, because what he does is too disturbing for a video game to actually show. Now let's talk about his house, because you never go inside Eddie's house in GTA 4. You never visit it, but Rockstar built it anyway, and described it anyway, and what they described is one of the most disturbing things in the game. Eddie lives in Dukes in what is probably the house he grew up in, because he remembers playing in an apple tree in the backyard as a boy, and that backyard, the same place he played as a child, is where he burns tires at night. Not because he likes fires, because the smell of burning tires covers the smell of rotting bodies inside the house. That is the only reason. His neighbors lived next to that smell for months and never knew what it meant. Inside the house, there's vomit and feces that he never cleans. There was a woman he locked in his cellar. That detail gets mentioned once and never explained further. Rockstar just dropped it and moved on. A woman in the cellar. That's it. And his cat. He has a pet cat named Boo Boo Wilkins, and he feeds it casseroles. Casseroles that, based on everything else we know about Eddie, are made from human remains. He is feeding his cat his victims, and when Nico's encounter with him is over, Eddie says he would never hurt Boo Boo Wilkins. Never. Now, Mississippi, here's the kicker. This man has done things that are genuinely unspeakable to human beings, but draws a hard line at his cat. And somehow that contrast, the fact that he has one thing he
he protects makes him feel more real and more wrong than if he'd just been pure evil with nothing human left in him. Now let's talk about the second real serial killer Rockstar based him on, because this one is about the blogs. Eddie Lowe has online accounts, a conspiracy website called whattheydonotwantyoutoKnow.com, and a blog called Blog Snobs, both titled Eddie Lowe Filth Slayer. His My Room page, which is GTA 4's version of MySpace, says 0 friends, not 1. He has 0 friends on a social media website where he is actively posting, and his posts are written exactly like the Son of Sam letters. David Berkowitz was a serial killer in New York in 1976 and 1977. He kills 6 people, but what made him even more famous than the murders were the letters he sent to police and newspapers while he was still active. Rambling, self-important, written in third person, describing himself as a force of nature, mocking the investigators. And Eddie's posts read exactly the same way. Same tone, same delusion, same complete absence of normal human understanding. Rockstar studied those letters and wrote Eddie's posts to match them. And there's a detective in the game named John Atkinson who is hunting Eddie. And just like the real investigators who chased Son of Sinem, Atkinson is more interested in the book deal and the movie adaptation than actually catching the killer. Eddie knows his name, reads about him online, mocks him on his blog because Eddie knows Atkinson will never actually catch him. And the LCPD's response to all of this, they spend the whole game trying to come up with a cool nickname for the killer. They try Headhunter. They argue about it in newspaper articles. The mayor of Liberty City publicly says heads will roll for the embarrassing nickname situation, then immediately corrects himself and says people will suffer instead. They are having public arguments about branding while Eddie is operating freely every single night. Now the second encounter, because this is where Eddie fully drops the mask.
Now the second encounter, because this is where Eddie fully drops the mask. You find him in a dark alleyway in Burkham. He tries to make small talk, and then he asks Nico if he enjoys being spanked. And Nico, who has survived wars, killed dozens of people, lost people he loved, and come through some of the worst things Liberty City can throw at you, tells Eddie to get lost and that this behavior is not cool. And Eddie loses it completely. He goes into a full, detailed description of what he has done to children. He talks about what he did to a quarterback he kidnapped. He talks about pulling out a girl's intestines just to see if he could feel something. And he says he couldn't. He felt nothing.
And your daughter? Your pretty little daughter, Mrs. Abrahams? And he's ripped out her intestines just to see if he could feel anything. And you know what? He couldn't. Yeah, he couldn't.
And Nico just tells him to get out of his life, because there is literally nothing else to say. Even Nico Bellic has no framework for what Eddie Lowe is. And then Eddie pulls a knife and attacks, and Nico kills him in self-defense. Now, here is something most people never think about. The hardware store woman. Eddie mentions on his blogs that he loved a woman once and then found out she was a quote-unquote whore. And when you read his blogs, you find out what actually happened. A female clerk at a hardware store told him, "Have a nice day," the way clerks do as their job. Eddie, who has no normal social understanding whatsoever, decided she was in love with him. He followed her home, he knocked on her door, and he asked her to nurse him, to let him feed from her like a baby. And when she was horrified and said no, Eddie killed her in anger and called her a whore. And Rockstar put it in a random encounter that most players never even find. And now let's talk about what Eddie Lowe left behind after he died, because it did not end in that alleyway. You kill Eddie in self-defense, and that accidentally solves the biggest serial killer case in Liberty City. The police had nothing, months of murders, no leads, can't even agree on a nickname, and Nico, just by defending himself, closed the whole case. The news reports after are genuinely unbelievable. Detective Atkinson goes on record and says he was literally heading over to Eddie's house when the call came in, and then immediately pivots to talking about how his screenplay will now have a slightly different ending and will be labeled based on true events, because that will make a better story. And then after he dies, his blog keeps getting updated. Nobody fully knows why. Nobody has properly explained it. It just keeps updating, like he never stopped. And then, in GTA 5, years later, you're driving Trevor's truck and you turn on the CB radio, and a truck driver checks in. His name is Eddie Lowe.
just a regular man. And immediately, everyone on the radio starts mocking him for sharing a name with the GTA 4 serial killer. The driver sounds exhausted, defeated, just a normal guy with the worst possible name, and it's actually a little funny. But it also shows you something. Eddie Lowe's name became so embedded in the world Rockstar built that years later, in a completely different city, it still carries weight. People still know who he is, still react to just the name. And then in Red Dead Redemption 2, Rockstar did it again. There is a serial killer in the frontier named Edmund Lowry Jr. He strings up mutilated bodies and leaves pieces of a map inside them leading to his hideout. He writes letters demanding newspaper coverage. He attacks the sheriff as soon as his handcuffs come off, even though two armed men are standing right there, because he simply cannot stop himself. So why is Eddie Lowe the most disturbing character in GTA? Not just GTA 4, the whole franchise. Because every other villain in GTA makes some kind of sense. The corrupt ones want power. The drug bosses want money. Even the most violent ones have a logic you can follow. But Eddie Lowe has no motivation that any normal person can understand. Players on forums have said they felt genuinely disturbed after meeting Eddie. Not excited disturbed the way you feel after a scary movie. Actually unsettled in real life, because Eddie is not exciting villain disturbing. He's the kind of wrong that sits with you quietly after you stop playing. And one of the most chilling things in the whole game is that if you disarm him when he attacks, he runs, and the screen shows a message that says, Eddie Lowe is still out there, waiting. Not gone, not dead, waiting. That is what Rockstar made, and they put it in a random encounter that you almost miss without having ever seen the entire game. So what do you guys think? Did you ever meet Eddie before you knew who he was? What did you think when he started talking? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And by the way, I also made videos on why GTA 3 feels so scary and disturbing, and a full deep dive on Auntie Paulette from GTA Vice City, and why GTA San Andreas feels like the loneliest game Rockstar ever made. You should go watch all of those. I'll meet you there.